Hello again, and thank you for joining us for one more edition of Coffee with Police Experts, ILEDA 2022 edition. My name is Doug Wyllie of Police Magazine. I'm here with Chris Christman of the Seattle Police Department. Chris, you're teaching here at ILEDA in St. Louis, Missouri, this week on a topic that I have some interest in, and the only explanation for it is when I first came into this universe of law enforcement, I saw that it wasn't particularly well discussed. It wasn't even known to some folks, and it's autism. People on the ASD spectrum, and there's a great many reasons why persons on the spectrum come in contact with law enforcement. They have tendencies and different types of behaviors which might attract attention, which might set some people off, and they might think that something's wrong with this person. They might need medical help. They may present some sort of perceived threat, that type of thing. And when I first came into it, I was like, wow, no one's really talking about this, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about this. And you are instructing this for law enforcement and for law enforcement trainers to take back to their agencies. What are some of the things that you're teaching about persons on the spectrum and their contacts with law enforcement?
So some of the topics that I cover in my class, I talk about stimming. What is it? How can that draw them into our world, I guess would be one of the ways I would describe it. So stimming, there's a tendency among people on the spectrum to go missing, wandering, elopement as it's referred to. So I talk about the missing persons and how we can respond to that as well. I talk about some of the sensory issues that are pretty common with folks on the autism spectrum and how that can affect our contacts either positively or negatively. And what we can do as law enforcement to minimize those sensory issues that we bring with us to every call.
So let's unpack each of those one at a time. The sensory issues, well, let's go with stimming first, because that's one of the ones that it's kind of simple to observe. It's not exactly something that's mysterious. Once you've seen it, you identify what it is. But again, when I first came into this universe, a lot of people didn't even know the word.
Sure.
Right? So let's unpack exactly what that looks like and how you would respond to it.
Sure. So what stimming refers to is specific repetitive movements or noises, and it's pretty much generally strictly associated with autism. One of the things that I tell the cops that come to my class is if you hear the word stimming, immediately think that there's some sort of autism-related component to whatever incident you're on, just because you really won't hear the word stimming associated anywhere else but with autism.
Yeah, right. And that's what we call a clue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
So let's go into sensory issues. So people on the spectrum sometimes will do target glances at things like your badge, your gun, things on your duty belt. They'll be attracted to certain noises or sounds or touches and textures, and they'll also be repelled by certain things. For example, lights and sirens are a big trigger, and it's got a lot of connotations in today's language, triggering, what have you, but they will affect a person on the spectrum in a way that isn't typical with other folks.
Oh, yes.
So the lights and sirens, the badge, the gun. Tell us about some of the stimuli elements to people on the spectrum.
Sure. Well, as you're saying, yeah, what I've noticed with people on the spectrum is that a lot of times with sensory issues, you can get these really, really wide swings from one side to the other, where you'll get folks that really, really dislike sensory stimulation, or they may go the other way and they seek out sensory stimulation.
Right.
Or it may go the same in the same person at different times.
Right. You'll see someone who's going to be doing something like this for a really long time, and then any touch whatsoever is anathema.
Yes, and for example, if you talk to parents of children on the spectrum, one of the common things that you will hear them say is that my child hates loud noises, but they're the loudest person in every room that they're in.
Yeah.
So it's pretty common. That's one of the things. One of the things that you mentioned as far as the police car lights, red and blue lights, one of the things that I talk about in my class that a lot of times cops don't think about is body cams.
Yeah.
Right? Our body cams that we use at Seattle PD, they've got, they're probably big around as this glass, 3.5, 4 inch diameter.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
Diameter red blinking light
Yeah.
that most officers wear in the center of their chest.
Right.
So if we're talking about sensory stimulation, a big red blinking light in the middle of your chest only adds to that sensory overload, and it buzzes and can make some noises as well. So one of the things I talk to the officers in my class about is if you know you're going on a call that has some sort of autism-related component, and you have the ability to put that body cam on what we refer to in Seattle as stealth mode, where it doesn't blink and it doesn't buzz and it doesn't make noises. Do that.
Yeah.
Because we want to reduce all of the sensory input that we already bring.
Yeah, because you do want to minimize and mitigate the potential for an adverse effect of that type of a technology, if you, for lack of a better word, being in the presence. You have to have the technology running. It's part of the police policy and procedure, and it's certainly there for the protection of the officer and the subject who's present, but it also could potentially lead to a negative outcome.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So, and then the lights and the sirens thing. I mean, when you get to a call where it's a known home, you know, where there's an ASD subject, maybe you've had previous calls, or maybe the person who resides there said, hey, you know, I have a family member, this person's on the spectrum, you know, and that self-reporting is extremely helpful. I've been an advocate for that for a long time. You know, kill the lights and the siren well before you get there, or leave it a block away. Do what you need to do from a safety perspective, but also at the same time understand that there is a consequence to that, right?
Sure, absolutely. And you know, when we're specifically talking about sensory issues, one of the things that some officers might not even think about is backup officers in the room.
Yeah.
Right? Because what I tell the folks who come to my class is, you know, let's say I'm primary on the call and I'm talking to someone that is on the spectrum. Generally speaking, if nothing of concern is going on between, and I'm, you know, directing myself towards you, but if nothing of concern is going on between myself and the person that I'm talking to or whatever, the backup officers, they'll be across the room, they'll be keeping an eye on it, but typically you'll find they're talking about what their plans are for the weekend, or where they're going on vacation, or the new truck that they just bought, something along those lines. But what I tell the cops that come through my class is, hey, if those side conversations do not need to be had, don't have them.
Yeah.
Because whatever it is you're talking about over here might completely derail whatever it is I'm trying to accomplish over here.
Yeah, and as a tangent to that, I think that that's a best practice pretty much all the way. But, you know, especially when you're dealing with someone on the spectrum, because that distraction, now you don't have their attention anymore, and now that you're trying to resolve this thing right here and right now, and that's interfering with absolutely resolution. So we've talked about, you know, stimming, we've talked about sensory issues, we got a little bit into target glances. Let's do that a little bit, because the target glances at the guns especially is something that a person on the spectrum, it's a fascination, it's a curiosity.
Sure.
It's not meant to be, hey, I'm thinking about trying to grab on that, because once you've identified you've got someone who's on the spectrum, and if there are some physical and physiological tells and signs that you might be clued into, and that could take a little bit of training with a video or, you know, some examples that you might see. But people on the spectrum may not in any way appear different from what would be called a typical person. Right? Sure. So that target glance, you have to evaluate what that is. And that could come from the communication and the perception, and maybe some understanding of the home you're coming to, or the residency, or the business you're coming to, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And as far as the target glance, another thing that I talk about in my class is kind of what I sometimes refer to as like the trifecta of the bad call, which if you're dealing with people on the autism spectrum, it's pretty common that they can be attracted to bright, shiny objects. Yeah. It's pretty common that they might not necessarily have an understanding of what a good personal bubble, personal space is. And then it's also pretty common that some folks can be pretty handsy and seek out stimulation through feeling things, which for cops, if you run into that person and they like to feel things, they like to touch different textures, they're attracted to bright, shiny stuff, which depending on what your police uniform looks like, we bring all kinds of bright, shiny stuff with us, whether it's badges and buttons and polished gun belts and radios and guns like you're talking about. And then they have that lack of understanding of how close is too close when I'm talking to you. Right. Then that's where the officers can really run into problems with someone who might unexpectedly try to touch them or stand too close. Yeah. And one of the things that I really try to convey to the officers in my class is I will never ever teach a class where I tell you that bad officer safety practices are what you should do as a police officer. Like I don't ever want people to leave my class thinking that what I told them was bad officer safety practices. But along those lines, what I do tell them is, if you're dealing with a subject that you know is on the autism spectrum, anticipate that you could run into that trifecta, all three of those in this person. And if and when that does happen, try not to react under the like, oh my God, he was going for my gun, and throw them through the wall on like a gun retention thing, because that's not what it's going to be. Yeah. Odds are It's going to be what you're talking about, where they're touchy-feely, they're attracted to it. Maybe they think
it's a curiosity.
Yeah, exactly. It's curiosity, and they don't know how close it's too close. So what I tell them is, hey, feel free to ask them to step back, or you take a step back if you need to. Maintain your good officer safety bubble.
Right.
Don't ever think I'm telling you to violate good officer safety practices, but please just understand and expect that could happen. And when it does, try not to overreact under the like I'm saying, like, oh my God, he went for my gun, or he tried to grab me, or something along those lines. And again, even just talking to you or talking to the audience, whoever's watching this, I hope I'm accurately conveying what I'm trying to get across.
Yeah, I believe that you are. In fact, I do know that you are. So, Chris, as I mentioned, there are myriad reasons why someone on the spectrum might come in contact with law enforcement. A whole host of them are based on misunderstanding, or a lack of understanding, or total, lack of knowledge. Another one, though, is I don't know if it's the most common, but it's certainly the one that I read the most about, is someone who's gone missing. Someone who's wandered from the home. And the really basic, low level. Here's what you need to know: where's your water in your community? Look for the lakes, the ponds, and the pools and the puddles, because that's, for some really to me unknown reason, that's one of the places where a wandering ASD subject might be gravitated towards. But they also, you find them walking the street, walking the freeway, being in the middle of the road. And so when you go to the place where they've been reported missing, you're gathering the information, name, etc., all the things you can gather. And hopefully you're going to get from the person volunteering the information about the person you're looking for. By the way, my son, daughter, aunt, uncle, what have you, is autistic, or is on the spectrum. They'll give you the language, and now okay, what do I do next?
Absolutely.
What do you tell the officers to do next?
Well, so if I could back it up just a couple steps, I try not to get too much into statistics, but I really do think there are two statistics that I use in my class that really convey how important our correct response to missing persons on the autism spectrum is. And those two stats are, if you have a child who's under age 5 and they're missing long enough for police to be contacted, 60% of the time that call ends in that child's death.
Yeah.
And what I tell my cops is, in layman's terms, if you get dispatched to that call and you look down at the computer in your patrol car and it says 4-year-old with autism is missing, that child has a better chance of turning up dead than they do alive.
Yeah.
It's shockingly high. And then the other one, which goes along with your water obsession that you're talking about, is that 14 and younger, the cause of all accidental deaths is drowning 91% of the time.
Yeah.
So to that end, search your missing persons with autism. Absolutely search your nearby water sources first.
Yeah.
Depending
reservoirs.
Depending on what part of the
ponds.
country you're in, right?
Yeah.
Your pools, your puddles,
Mississippi River running right by the city.
Absolutely. If you live where I do out in Washington, all of the new housing developments, all of the new schools that they're building, they all have that big drainage pond right at the edge of them, right? Which conveniently located. If you have a school, kids on the autism spectrum going to that school, that pond is right there. Yeah. Right. So absolutely search your water sources first. The reason that they give why they're attracted to, for why people on the spectrum are attracted to water, number one, the shimmeriness of the surface. They like that stimulation, and then also they like the sound. That too, yes, absolutely. And then the enveloping, the weight of the feel of water. They like that enveloping feeling. So that's why they absolutely people on the spectrum are absolutely attracted to water. So search your nearby water sources, and then other things to think about. Check, if you're responding to a missing person's call, check the neighbors, see do they have, and I'm not advocating for any specific camera system, but do they have a ring system? Mm-hmm. Everybody's got ring systems.
Seems to, yeah.
Right, so can we look at if the family doesn't, look at the neighbors' cameras and see what time they left and what direction they left. Sure. Absolutely, right? There are some things you can do, depending on what your agency has. Do you have helicopters? Do you have a drone program? Do you have a harbor program? I even talk about things like, for us here in Seattle, our fire department, America's Heroes, they have portable FLIRs on their fire rings. So let's say you're searching a large park and it's dark and it's night. Can we wake the fire department up and get their portable FLIR system to look in the woods? Right. Yeah, we're going to find a lot of raccoons and stuff like that, but you also might find that person that's missing.
I had never thought of that. That's a fantastic idea.
So really what I tell them is there is no... pull out all the stops. Yeah. There's no distance that you should not go to on this missing persons calls because the mortality rate is so high. We're literally talking life and death. Yeah. Another thing that I talk about in my class is overlapping jurisdictions. Let's say you're a county deputy and the city in your county, you scan their radio and you hear they have a missing person. If you're able to respond to that call, it's probably worth your time.
Yeah.
We're literally talking life and death. If you're in a non-patrol position like I am in Seattle in our training unit, when we go to lunch, we still have patrol radios in our cars, our Toyota Priuses or whatever we're driving around to lunch, right? If you're in a position where you can disregard your lunch and go assist in the search, it's absolutely worth your time. We're talking life and death and minutes count.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And worth everyone's time, absolutely everyone's time at every level in law enforcement, is to become more conversant with what ASD is and what you're meant to be looking for when you are dealing with a known or an unknown to be ASD subject, because there's, as you mentioned, it is life and death in many cases, but it also can be so benign in many cases. It's just a matter of having the knowledge and the understanding of what it is you're dealing with and how you would best resolve whatever matter is at hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Chris, I want to thank you very much for your time. Appreciate everything that you're doing for law enforcement in Seattle, here at Alita, and around the country.
Thank you very much.
Come back again one more time for more Coffee with Police Experts. I'm Doug Wyllie on behalf of Police Magazine here in St. Louis, Missouri. Thanks a lot.